Hi, I just want to take this opportunity to share with you some ideas that I've pulled together on IEP development, the IEP process itself, some strategies, some thoughts, and some ideas. And I've compiled some information from experiences of myself and others, as well as some pieces from the literature. So with that, I'm going to put the share screen on so that you can see what I'm looking at. Okay. All right, so let's start from the beginning. And I've listed the sources on the front, so if you are interested, I do have the updated Better IEPs, but I like the original one. I worked from that, but there is an updated version, a 2006 edition. And then the other piece that I used, IEP and inclusion tips for parents and teachers. That's another good piece. The first thought I'd like to share with you is knowledge is power. And what I mean by that is the more that you know about the process, the more that you know about the family that you're working with, the more that you know about writing IEPs, about the law itself, the stronger you're going to be as an educator. So inform yourself and get the information that you need so that you can do the best job possible as a special educator. Next, I would say to you, communicate with the parents, the guardians, the families themselves. Now, we talked a little bit about that in the last session with collaboration and how important it is to collaborate with parents. And I can't tell you how important that is. But just a few points to share with you. One of the questions that Steve Holtz asked of me this week was, how did I prefer to be communicated with as the parent, so as the special educator working with me? And the special educator that works with me knows that I prefer email. I prefer to be updated regularly. Once a week isn't enough for me. So, getting to know who your families are and what their communication patterns are is very important. And it will change from family to family. So, learning how often you need to communicate with them is another good piece to know, because some will want you to communicate daily and some may, be okay with hearing from you every few weeks. So again, knowing the families is important. Scheduling the IEP itself in advance is very important. Unfortunately, we worked with a special educator recently who decided to schedule an IEP meeting the day before the meeting. So my husband and I did not go to the meeting and said we would not be coming because we didn't have advance notice. We couldn't change our schedules. So it's a mutual agreement that needs to occur. So, be mindful that those parents are working and they have schedules as well. Discussing who the IEP members will be at the meeting is essential. Parents need to know who will be there. And if I have had the experience as a parent that if there are people at the meeting and I didn't know about it, then sometimes we don't continue with the meeting because that's an unfair disadvantage. So remembering that those parents are equal parts of the IEP team. They are as an equal coming to that team. You are all one team. And I think I drove that point home before in my previous slideshow with you. Fill the room around them. And what I mean by this is if you have parents that you are anticipating maybe a little apprehensive about coming to the IEP meeting, then it's important that you don't overwhelm them with 15 people sitting in the room and you bring them in. So instead, I always said this as a principal, I would ask the special educator to talk with the parent and bring the parent into my office just with me there. And so we would sit down and talk and have a conversation. And then another member of the team might come in. And then another member would come in. And eventually the room has filled around the parents and they feel like they were part of that room to begin with. And it's really a comfort level piece, but it's so important with parents. And it allows them to pick their seat where they want to sit at the table, which I think that's important too. Please don't surprise parents with any aspect of the IEP process. They should be, they should know what's going to happen when they get to that table. There shouldn't be a hidden agenda or a hidden discussion prior to that meeting. And be careful about educational jargon. My husband and I always run into this when we go to meetings together, because obviously I do know the jargon and I throw it around and the teachers throw it back. And he's had to stop our meeting at times and say, I don't understand that. Can you explain that to me? And he feels comfortable enough doing that, obviously, and does know some of the jargon that we toss around. But not every parent will. And you don't want a parent to leave the meeting frustrated because you use terms that they were not knowledgeable of. A colleague of mine who has since retired from her years as a special educator, and she was a distinguished educator, and she did some consulting for Patan. Her biggest concern with any of the special educators that she supervised was she never wanted them to come to a meeting and read verbatim the IEP to the parents or the team. Now remember, you should not be writing the IEP before you get to the meeting. And I know many people do that. They call it a draft and they bring it to the meeting, and then you look at it and then you can make decisions if you like it or not. That's not how it should be written. And one suggestion I would have for you is to have a skeletal outline and perhaps have some goals that you and the parents have worked on, and you've shown those goals to the parents, 2 weeks ahead of time, a week ahead of time. These are goals I'm looking at putting in there. Would you be comfortable with me putting this in a skeletal outline and bringing it to the meeting? But you want their permission. You don't want to come with a draft IEP to the meeting because that's not part of the IEP process. Parents are equal partners with the IEP team. And I've said this a number of times. But listen to what they want for their child. Really, let them talk. Encourage them to write the present levels, not present levels, that's you as a special educator, but their parental input. If they have not put parental input into the IEP in a written format, encourage them to do that, because that's a document that will follow that child, and that information is valuable for that child's history as the child continues through the system with another IEP team the next year. There'll be new people, and all that information will be there so that the individuals working with a child will really know who he or she is. So encouraging the parents to be involved is paramount, and that comes through developing the relationship. I tell as a principal for many, many years, and I told every special educator that I've worked with to document, document, document. You cannot document enough. Everything needs to be documented and saved. And today, with everything that we have electronic, there's really no reason why that shouldn't occur. I would strongly encourage you to document, not necessarily so that you can show that you've done it, but it will be needed in the legal process should you need it. So it's important to have that documentation. My friend, I put this on because she always says this. There's not a special ed jail. Don't worry, you won't go to special ed jail. And she always encouraged me when I was learning the process. When I was a principal, she was the special ed director in the district that I was in. And she would say, you're not, even if you make a mistake, if you're conscientious and you demonstrate due diligence, everything will be fine. So, that's what I would tell you is make sure that you are following the law. And if you're unsure, go to the LEA, go to your special education director, go to the special ed coach that you're working with. But don't be fearful that if I make a mistake, I'm going to end up in the special ed jail, because there's really not a special ed jail. Due process procedures, I really believe, can be avoided when you develop relationships with people. And I'm just going to digress a little and share with you that my one child, when we pushed her from first grade to fourth grade, I really felt that the other members of the IEP team had not developed rapport with me. And really the person to reach out and do that is the special educator. And there were a number of incidents that I documented as a parent that I felt were contradictory to building a relationship with me. And so when I went to that IEP meeting at the end of the year with my husband and a special education advocate, I shared the concerns that I had, and it was very unfortunate that that relationship hadn't been built, because trust had broken down among the members of the team. And to the degree that the special education director had to be involved with all of our meetings, and I became the parent that was the problem parent. And really, that never should have happened, because that's the responsibility of both parties, both the parents and the special educator, is to build a relationship, and obviously the administrator and the teachers that work with the child. But the collaborative relationship had not been built strong enough to circumvent due process procedures for us, because we felt that Juliana had not been receiving the education that she should have been receiving. Obviously, there were procedural steps within policy that had not been followed. There was not a meeting for ESY, which is required for children who have multiple disabilities. Before February 28th, there wasn't a meeting for that, and we were told this is what her ESY was, rather than having a collaborative meeting and deciding what the process would look like and what her needs would be. So everything fell apart, and it was really ugly. I went to a compliance officer, and I called the 1-800 number, and I still have all the documentation. And in the end, I decided not to follow through with legal action. The district was taking steps to make it better, and they were transitioning from a special ed director who had been there for many years and was retiring into a new person. And so I decided to give the new person the benefit of the doubt. And really, in the long run, it was much better for me as a parent to be collaborative and to work through this so that we could build a relationship, because my not only my daughter, but my son will be in that school and receive services someday. And it's all based upon the relationships that you build. So it doesn't pay, in my mind, to go to due process unless you absolutely have to do that, and you see that the district is not willing to move into support. So I share that as a parent, but please know that your job as the teacher is to build a relationship and work with those families, because you don't want to get in that situation. Know the law. Remember, knowledge is power. This is another question that Steve asked earlier, at the end of last week, but he asked, he was in a situation where someone was not implementing the IEP, and he was in a co-teaching situation, and had asked who's ultimately responsible. Well, that's the LEA, the local education agency. It's the school district, and who is the person that can speak to the resources. So if the person who is speaking to resources, which would be the principal or the special education director, or sometimes the special education coach, if that person is sitting at the table as the LEA, then they have to be able to commit to resources at the table. If you're asked to be the LEA, be very careful what you commit to, and prior to your being designated to that position, it's okay to ask that person, what am I allowed to commit to and what am I not allowed to commit to? Because legally, at the IEP meeting is where the commitment takes place, and you're not really supposed to leave the IEP meeting and get permission afterwards to get the resources for services. It should happen and commit at the IEP meeting. The superintendent is not part of the equation. They're not part of the IEP team, nor is the school board. So be really careful about that, but know that it's the LEA. You do your job, and you won't go to special ed jail. Okay, focus on the student and his or her needs. These are some insights. Don't take things personally. Again, coming back to the situation with Juliana and my daughter, and when we sat around the table and I shared with the IEP team my concerns and how they had been addressed in the last month from the special educator, and I gave specific examples of how she had not used inclusive practices, including, but not limited to, the fact that her van transportation, she has special transportation, that transportation would drop her off at a special door, and someone would walk her to the special education room, the special education room, as opposed to the first grade classroom. And that's where my concerns as a parent came into play, because we were really looking at an inclusive environment for her. And by having her go to a special education classroom first thing, that's not inclusive. So I shared that example at the IEP meeting, and who's responsible for that? That's the special educator. That's that team. And I said, this should not have been happening. And there were a couple other incidents that I shared. And after I shared them, one of the coaches, the special education coach, spoke up and said, don't you have anything positive to say about the special educator? And as a parent, I really didn't want to hear that. To me, it was important that they heard what I said. I was trying to focus on Juliana. And that's what I have to say to you as the teacher. When parents come at you and say, I didn't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this, you have to put on that hard shell, and you have to think, it's not about whether they like you as a person. It's about the actions and what you did, and was that appropriate for that child? Were you implementing the IEP? And if you weren't, then you say, okay, then let's see how I can do this better. Let's work together. Don't try to defend an action if you know for sure what you did was wrong. So keep focused on the student and what the needs are, and continually reinforcing the relationship that you have. And most of all, be professional. Okay, here's the slide that I skipped through. When we talk about strategies and writing the IEP, we want to make sure that we're writing annual goals. Your goals should be for a year. So when you write that goal, you need to have high expectations of what you think that child can achieve for the year, and be realistic, but have high expectations. You have worked with that child, or you have input, and as a team, you make the best decision. For example, my son Angelo, at his last IEP meeting that we had, there was a goal for his speech that he was going to go from 1 MLU, I think that's mean literal unit, something, MLU, see, I don't even know all the terms, and that's for his speech, but they were going to go from 1 to 2.78. And I said, that's not reasonable. I want it to be 3 or 4. He will be 6 years old next year at this time, and he should have, 3 and 4 word sentences, which he speaks to us at home. But when he transfers that in the community or in his school, he doesn't have that. So, we looked at what is an annual goal that is appropriate, and that's based upon the present levels of performance. We call that the PLOP, the present levels of performance. What is he currently doing? And that's data that has been collected and benchmarked along the way. And we look at what's reasonable for a goal. And then from those goals, you will write objectives. And some people call these the sub-goals, but each objective will be a benchmark. So we wrote the goal, we wrote the IEP that's being implemented September 1st for Angelo. So 3 months later, there's a benchmark, there's an objective that we know he will reach a certain level. So we have that in there for him. So there are objectives beneath each goal. And then make sure each goal is measured and is a measurable goal. So use measurable terms. And I know Dr. Schreiner worked with you on this. So you want to make sure that those goals are measurable. Be very specific. Be very specific in your measurement. Some things to think about when you're writing the IEP. If there are behaviors that the child is demonstrating that are going to impact on the child learning, then you have to write a separate behavior plan. Now, those of you that have had 545 with me, you know about functional behavioral analysis and behavioral intervention plans. Those of you that haven't had that course will be looking into that in the spring much more closely. Another piece to think about is many children who have disabilities are not engaged socially like their typical developing peers for a variety of reasons. But the best way to engage those students socially is to look at what recreational or community activities are they involved in or are added as related services. So any of those extracurriculars, we could write those in as related services to support the child. Those often get missed. I would tell you as a educator to expect parents to have strong feelings when they come to the table. This is their baby. It might be their only child. It might really be their baby. Like for us with 6 kids, when I go for Angelo, I'm emotional. I've been emotional for my typical developing children when I go for a meeting because I feel very strongly about their well-being, and I want to make sure that they're doing the best that they can. So emotions run high at these meetings. If you haven't experienced them, be prepared. Parents can come in and be very angry and very upset. They could be emotional. They can show their compassion, but you'll see a range of behaviors at meetings from parents. And sometimes they're fine. You don't see anything. And sometimes you see a lot of antagonism and lack of collaboration from the parent. But I always would tell my principals when I train principals is to make sure you have the tissues available. And I always look for those when I go in the room. Where are the tissues? As the parent. But you remember that as the special educator because you're going to meet with parents, sometimes just to have a meeting with them, just a parent-teacher conference, and having that box of tissues handy for the parents in a very kind and generous way. It's just such a polite thing to do. Builds relationship too. Again, helping parents feel comfortable. I already mentioned about filling the IEP team, the meeting around them if necessary. You don't want to overwhelm the parents. Be prepared to reconvene if necessary. And sometimes you might be in a meeting where you're at a stalemate and things are not moving in the direction they should be moving. Some IEP meetings last in excess of 2.5 hours. One of Juliana's lasted 2.5 hours, and people got up and moved and came and left, and that's just a long period of time to have a meeting. I worked with someone who once said, if you have a meeting over an hour, then it's no longer a meeting because for a lot of reasons, people are drained physically and they're drained emotionally, and they're drained. Their brains are drained from thinking. So think about that as you prepare for the meeting. And if you can't get it all done, then reconvene the meeting. Now, administrators aren't going to want to hear that, and I never wanted to hear that. But you have to think about what's best for everyone at that team meeting. And sometimes, when you do have a stalemate or an issue, you just can't continue on. Remember, the LEA must be present. And I've already forewarned you about this, but remember, you have to be able to commit to resources if you've been designated as the LEA. And talk with the person that gives you that designation. I've been in meetings where, not for my children, but I remember as a teacher, when I was a teacher in the classroom and I would go to an IEP meeting, the guidance counselor was given the hat of the LEA. Now, the guidance counselor really can't commit to resources at the building level and cannot commit to resources at the district level. So that's, the indication for that LEA and what they should be able to do. I share this as a strategy that I used as a parent. And, there might be a clever or creative way that you can think of to make the climate comfortable for the parents that you work with in a very simple way. But I found this technique to work. I make cookies, and I take them into the IEP meetings. I've taken them into Juliana's, and I know who has certain allergies and what foods to avoid, and I've learned that about the members of her team. And certainly the membership changes from year to year because you do have a different general educator or several different general educators depending upon the way the dynamics of the team is established. But the principals remain the same, and the special educator and the speech and language clinician. And so, I know what they like, and it's my way of, putting that olive branch out and saying, hey, I really like what you're doing, and I appreciate you, and, we can work together. And so I do that kindness. Now, I know there are some people who, as an administrator, when I was a principal, I always had water. I had a pitcher of water, and I had glasses, like little plastic glasses at the table because, again, it's just a generous thing to do. But I always think about those pieces, the cookies and the tissues and the water, and it might not seem like part of that process, but it's that affective domain and that relationship building that is so crucial. Now that exhausts the piece that I've prepared for you about IEP development, thoughts, insights, and strategies. And I really didn't hit upon specifically how to write those goals. And I do have some IEPs that I would like to share with you. So when I get to school, because I'm at home now, I will scan those IEPs for you to take a look at. And then you can see some good IEPs and take a look at some IEPs that need some work. So with that, I'm going to stop our screen sharing and give you one last look before I leave, and wish you a good day. And I hope that if you have any questions, please feel free to send me a message on Blackboard, and I will do my best to respond. So have a great evening.